Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thank you for listening to Your Working Life, my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. I know that you spend a significant portion of your life at work, so my goal is to provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And I am delighted to welcome my very special guest to the show today, Bill Treasurer. Bill, welcome to the show.
Caroline, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our time.
As do I. So, Bill, let me tell the listening audience all about you. You are the author of Leaders Open Doors, which focuses on how leaders create growth through opportunity. You're also the author of Courage Goes to Work, an international best-selling book that introduces the concept of courage building, which we're going to talk about today. And you're the author of Courageous Leadership, a program for using courage to transform the workplace, an off-the-shelf training toolkit that organizations can use to build workplace courage. And your first book, Bill, is Right Risk, which draws on your experience as a professional high diver. So, Bill, let's dive right in. How did you get interested in the topic of courage?
Well, I got interested in the topic because I found mine, and I found mine through a coach who held me accountable to my own potential and nudged me into discomfort so that I found my courage. The genesis of my story, Caroline, is that I was a really awkward athlete. Like, you know, when you look at kids in the playground, I was the one that was picked last for a lot of the teams. And then one day at the local pool, we were jumping around on the diving board and doing back dives, and by mistake, I pulled my legs around and I did a backflip. And suddenly, I was different than everybody else. And this became my sport. I grew up in New York, and I won the Westchester County Diving Championships 3 times, and colleges started to dangle scholarships in front of me. And they would all ask the same question. They'd say, Bill, you're a great low-board diver. You're a great 1-meter specialist. Tell us about your high-board list of dives, because we have high-board here in college too. Well, the thing was, I was and am petrified of heights. So I had a decision to make. Am I going to walk away from another sport, or am I going to actually work through this debilitating fear of heights and find my courage? And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
So it's in a roundabout way, it's an unusual story, but what happened was my coach would take me down to Iona College, and they had a diving board that was built on a hydraulic lift. So he could now take the 1-meter board and make it 1.5 meters. And I was petrified, and I was going over on my dives, and I didn't want to go to practice. But after about 100 dives, it started to simmer down, and I got used to it. After 200 dives, I kind of got bored. And boredom is a great clue, as you know. And so what he did then was moved it up to 2 meters. And again, then I was awkward, and I was going over on my dives. But through this process of modulating back and forth between comfort and discomfort, he would move me out into discomfort long enough for me to get uncomfortable and experience growth, and then I'd settle into those skills, and once I had settled into those skills and developed some competency, he'd move me back out into discomfort. Here's the long way of just telling you that the kid who started out with a profound fear of heights got a full scholarship to West Virginia University on the high board, and eventually, believe it or not, I became a world-class high diver as a member of the U.S. high diving team, diving from heights that scaled to over 100 feet, traveling at speeds in excess of 50 miles an hour into little pools that were 10 feet deep, all because a coach helped me encounter my own courage.
Wow, that's an amazing story, and I can just visualize those incremental steps, raising the level of the board. And what a great analogy for leaders in the career world. So let's segue. Why is courage important for leaders, Bill?
Courage is important because it's the way that people grow. Well, courage, first of all, it's always been the premier virtue outside of the workplace. Aristotle said courage is a virtue. And in fact, he called it the first virtue because it makes all the other virtues possible. The great theologian C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, he said that courage is not just one of the virtues. It's all of the virtues taken to the testing point. The Catholic Church calls courage one of the four cardinal virtues. So outside of the work world, courage has always been one of the premier, if not the premier, virtue. What I'm trying to promote is to say, why would it be any different in the workplace? I don't think it's different at all. I think that courage is the first virtue of a thriving career, and it's the first virtue of leadership. If you think of all the things that connect to courage in the workplace, here's just a handful of examples. To be a great salesperson means to knock on hundreds of doors in the face of rejection over and over again, and that takes courage. To be an innovator means to draw outside the lines, make some forward-falling mistakes, be willing to experiment. The greatest innovations almost always start out as blasphemy. You got to be willing to be a blasphemer if you're an innovator, and that takes courage. And then finally, to be a leader means to render bold decisions that some people are going to disagree with, and that takes courage. So if you remove courage from the equation, things like sales and innovation and leadership, not to mention things like negotiation and presentation skills and conflict, all those things that we encounter in the workplace become much more full of effort if we don't have courage as we face them.
Thank you so much for giving everyone listening permission to take those risks and to fail forward. That's a phrase I like, and I learned something new today. It's a great little anecdote. I haven't failed, I just haven't finished yet. And I think that's a lovely phrase to say, we're works in progress. And you talk about getting into that uncomfortable zone to move forward. So let me ask you this. I love the story that you shared about your diving coach and how he really took you literally to new heights. And I equate great leaders as coaches. So talk to me about a courageous leader that stands out for you, Bill.
Well, I can give you a couple of examples, but certainly my coach is one of them. And I'm going to say something that I know is provocative, and your listeners, it's going to hit their ears in a way that might cause their head to sort of turn to the side a little bit. But a leader's job is to make people uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, I don't mean it in a fear-stoking way. I mean it in a way that holds them accountable to their potential. What my coach, his name was Ford Winter. What Ford did was he wasn't doing it for his benefit. He was doing it for my benefit. He knew he believed in me before I believed in myself. He could see my potential before I could see in it. And eventually, because he carried the day by moving me into discomfort, I found my own courage. Now, I'll give you another example from my corporate experience. My second book is called Courage Goes to Work. And the person who wrote the foreword to that book is the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. Her name is Sarah Blakely, the founder of a company called Spanx.
Yeah.
So I've worked with Sarah on 4 occasions, and she wrote the foreword to my book, Courage Goes to Work. And she's a good example of a courageous leader. She said that whenever somebody makes a mistake at Spanx, especially when those mistakes fall forward and key us in onto a new business insight, I'm never disappointed. In fact, I go up to people and I give them a big high five. Now, what do you think that does for their willingness to try and experiment themselves?
Oh, it motivates them. Yeah.
Absolutely. She asks 2 really good questions. She says, what's the last best mistake that you made? So you as a leader. And then what's the last best mistake that you rewarded somebody else for making? Because you got to reinforce that behavior when you see it.
I love that. I do a lot of consulting work with leaders in corporate entities, and a very progressive company that I was in last week had a failure board, and it was a brilliant opportunity for them to showcase what didn't work and talk about the recovery and what they learned from it. So I love that concept. What's the last best mistake that you rewarded? Awesome.
Yeah, I love the failure board. I'm going to use that with my clients.
Please do. So, Bill, you're so prolific in your writing, and in Courage Goes to Work, one of your books, you talk about purposeful discomfort. And again, talked a little bit about that in your diving experience, but what might be an example in a work experience that is relatable to our audience?
Well, when I look at courage, I think that sometimes it's a mistake to look at this big amorphous mass that we call courage. It feels so big big. It's like Jupiter. It feels like it dwarfs us. And so we start thinking, well, I'm not really courageous. But I think if we carve courage down to size and not be thinking of the big C courage, but more of the little c courage, sort of the everyday tempered experience of courage, courage becomes accessible to all of us. So here's just a couple of examples of everyday courage. How about taking a job that eclipses your current skills?
Yeah.
Like sort of raising your hand for a role that you know for a little while is going to put you in over your head. That takes courage. Giving a presentation to your boss's boss or a big consequential new prospective client or to the board of directors. Presentation skills, for a lot of people, public speaking takes a tremendous amount of courage. Giving direct feedback to a peer or a direct report, or upward feedback to a boss and having to deliver a tough message that might be difficult for them to hear. That takes courage. Enforcing new performance standards on tenured employees that you might be leading who are older than you and who have been in the workforce longer than you, but you're now their boss. That takes courage. So there's plenty of examples of where courage is needed, not to mention sort of the regular examples of like asking for a raise as an example, or offering an idea that runs counter to the group in a meeting. So there's all sorts of examples. The question that I go back to is for each listener that who's listening in today, for yourself, what is your own high dive? What is the platform of safety that you might be standing on? And what would you put your courage to work if you had more courage? In other words, courage for the sake of what? What's important to you that having more courage might help further you along the way towards getting it?
Love that. One of the questions that I often ask as a coach is, what would you do if you weren't afraid, right? And that leads us into the conversation of what is your uncomfortable zone and how do we work through that? Awesome. So, Bill, I'm intrigued by all of your prolific writings, but especially this Courageous Leadership, a program for using courage to transform the workplace. So walk me through that, because I think so many listeners are saying, I need to implement this in my organization. And I'd love for you to tell them what you do.
Oh, sure. Well, I have a life that I like, right? I have a low tolerance for boredom and routine, and fortunately, I've been able to sort of design the life that I want to have, and I get to do a variety of things. So it really runs the gamut. From yesterday, I was in San Francisco, and I gave a talk to a Canadian company that was awarding their employees. It was called the Bravo Conference, and they were sort of reinforcing the notion of the importance of being brave, and they had a lot of brave employees, and so I came in and gave a keynote talk. And other days I might be going down to a petro company in Houston, where I do a standard series of workshops around courageous leadership in a one-day format. Other times I'm working with a client in Chicago for an 18-month comprehensive leadership development program tied to succession planning. So it really runs the gamut. But when it comes to this idea of courage, what could be helpful to your listeners is that what I like to think about, instead of, again, this big giant mass that we call courage, is carving it down to size. I think that there's three expressions of courage, three ways of thinking about courage, or what I would say the behavioral buckets of courage. Yeah. And the first bucket of courage is try courage. It's the courage of first attempts. When you try something for your very first time, other people may have done the thing you're getting ready to try, but for you, it's crossing a threshold into the unknown. It's got some uncertainty attached to it. It takes an application of energy on your part. You might fail and get hurt, but if you don't try this thing, you'll be sort of diminished as a person. So I call this try courage. It's the courage of first attempts, or the courage of action. When people say, I want that person to step up to the plate to do something, they're typically talking about try courage. The second expression of courage, the second bucket of courage, is not about the courage of action. Sometimes it's actually about the courage of inaction, meaning it's my willingness to release my need to control or my need to be right, to experience vulnerability, and I call that trust courage. It's the courage of exposure, for me to sort of put down and get disarmed and get real, open myself up, and knowing that I might be betrayed if I do that. If I don't do it, I won't be able to build relationships with the person or people that I'm encountering. But if I do offer that trust, I may be taken advantage of and I might get betrayed. So it takes courage to trust other people, particularly as you go along in life and get a little bit jaded. But if you don't trust, you'll never get strong bonds of interpersonal relationship. So trust takes courage. And then the third bucket of courage, so the first one was try courage, the second one was trust courage. The third expression of courage is what I call tell courage, the courage of voice or assertiveness. Me being the truth teller, me acknowledging what's going on for me and not biting my tongue to go along and get along, not in a way that I'm a malcontent, but in a way that says I'm no longer willing to swallow my opinion just because it's going to make it's going to please you. So it's this willingness to be assertive in our conversations and communication with people. So try, trust, and tell are three buckets of courage. And what I find, Caroline, is that most people are sort of overflowing in one of the buckets and diminished in another bucket, and that it's incumbent upon all of us to try to keep our buckets as full as we can.
Love that. Thank you for that. What a great action plan. Now, of course, I want all of our listeners to read your amazing books and reach out to you in your consulting and keynote practice. However, baby steps. Let's take it one step at a time. So what's a tip today that you can provide for a listener who wants to lead with more courage? What's that baby incremental step to raise that proverbial diving board an inch?
So it's a simple question, but it's a question that until you answer it, it's very hard to make any progress when it comes to being courageous. And it's the four most important words you'll ever learn in the English language, what I call the holy question. What do you want? Most people can tell you what they don't want, or some people will gripe about the conditions that they've got that they never asked for. So that's sort of getting halfway there. But until you can identify with specificity, sort of narrow it and name it, what it is exactly that you want, until you can do that, it's going to be hard to enlist other people to help you to get what you want, and it's not going to be easy for you to actually get it because you don't know what it is. So it's getting to clarity with some degree of specificity about what do you want, because once you figure out what it is you want, the next question becomes, okay, what are the steps that I can take, some simple actions that I might be able to take to move me along the continuum of getting closer to what it is that I do want.
Oh, love that. Again, as a coach, this is music to my ears because that self-reflection process and getting quiet and really giving yourself permission to ask that question is essential. Bill Treasurer, what a joy to have you on the show. You are a rock star. I learned a lot today. Tell us how we can buy your amazing books and connect with you out in the cybersphere.
Oh, sure. Well, terrific. And it's been, I've really enjoyed talking to you. The best way to do it would be to go to your favorite online retailer. You can also get in touch with me at billtreasurer.com. You can get in touch with me at couragebuilding.com, leadersopendoors.com. So there's all sorts of ways. And if you forget how, then just go to Google and search for Bill Treasurer, and you'll find out all sorts of ways to connect with me.
You do come up, so that's a great thing. Bill, I wish you continued success. I hope our paths cross again very soon, and I thank you for sharing your wisdom today.
My great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. Career and life satisfaction is possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. My show is now available on iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, and Stitcher. Leave a comment because I always appreciate hearing from my listeners. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.